Hey guys, welcome to Question of Strength, which is essentially my podcast where I talk about a topic that does interest me or something I've learned this week, as well as answer questions. Now, obviously, the most important and most fun part of this presentation is your questions and especially the answers. Quality or how much fun you're going to have is going to be entirely dependent on your questions. If you have good questions, you'll get good answers, so that's always fun. But if you have bad questions, you're going to get a sarcastic answer, which oftentimes is just as fun as a good answer, right? You're going to learn something or have fun. So, the topic I want to cover today before we get to your questions are a topic that are of particular interest to me at the moment, considering that I'm getting on the older side. I'm going to be, I think, 46 in in a month actually. So I'm gearing my training more toward graciously aging, or what people call pro longevity training, uh, instead of just focusing on being the biggest and strongest guy around. And I made several changes in my own exercise regimen. I want to say training. I don't want to say training because it's not just the training that has changed. I'm doing more things outside of the gym. For example, I'm doing several martial arts sessions per week. I'm about to start boxing. I'm doing a lot more walking, loaded carries, and stuff like that. And my training itself has been geared more toward what I'm going to be talking about in a moment, which is pro longevity. Now, one thing I want to mention: truly increasing lifespan, which longevity actually means. Um, okay, yeah, yes, exercise can help simply by making you healthier. For example, if you look at the amount of walking you do in a day, there's a strong correlation between early death and the amount of steps you do every day. Or more precise, it's not the steps that are that important, it's the level of background physical activity, how much you're moving on a day-to-day basis, does have a correlation with lifespan, basically by making you healthier. Okay, but true longevity, which is actually increasing your normal lifespan beyond what you would be able to achieve in an healthy state, it's kind of a complex topic. I'm not even sure if exercise has a big role to play there, because we're talking mostly about things like increasing telomeres length, could also be increasing the number of satellite cells, maintaining hormonal levels, and so on and so forth, which, to be fair, exercise can have some impact on. But I'm not sure that any type of training by itself can actually increase the projected lifespan that you can have. What we mean pro training, in my opinion, is more a matter of maintaining or even improving your level of functioning as you're getting older. Basically, being just as fit and capable and feeling just as great when you're getting older as when you were younger. Okay, and that, to me, is all about training in a way to maintain the things that naturally decrease as you're getting older. For example, muscle mass, power, strength, speed, mobility, and endurance are all things that get less effective, or decreases as you're getting older at different rates. For example, speed, agility, and power will be more impacted by aging than endurance. Um, Strength would be in the middle ground, and muscle mass would also be in the middle ground. So what you really want to focus on is not just on improving one of these things. So, for example, let's take muscle mass, which is probably the main goal that most of us have or add at the beginning of our training career. Um, yes, increasing muscle mass is part of longevity training, because as you're getting older, the human species will naturally get smaller muscle, and typically that also comes with an increase in body fat, mostly because you're getting a smaller engine, so you're burning less fuel. So if you keep the same dietary habits as you're getting older, being less active and having less muscle mass, you're gonna get fatter. Okay, so yeah, at least maintaining a good level of muscle mass and preventing the natural sarcopenia or decrease in muscle mass that comes with aging is certainly part of pro longevity training. But and honestly, most people have that figured out. Even the most more basic hypertrophy program will probably provide the stimulus necessary to at least slow down, if not completely stop and reverse muscle loss that come with aging. Where we tend to fail is the other factors. Okay, some of us, I mean, I want to say the most dedicated ones, will probably maintain strength and some endurance or conditioning. Okay, because we do that as part of our training. We might be lifting fairly heavy weights in our quest for more muscle mass. That will also lead to to strength gain. So it's fairly easily to maintain in that case. And I think that those who are, I want to say, more health conscious are already doing some amount of conditioning, cardiovascular exercise. So you are also working on that aspect. But very few people actually work on other elements like power, like speed, like agility, which are very important to pro longevity because that's what actually will lose the most. Now, you might not need to sprint a 10-second 100-meter when you're 60 years old, but if you do any types of sport like golf, like squash, like tennis, like racquetball, like pickleball, you certainly want to be more explosive and at least stay as explosive as you were when you were younger. Okay. Um, if we look at the health aspect, explosive work will be great at preventing the conversion of fast twitch fibers into slow twitch fibers that comes naturally with aging. It also can increase neurological efficiency, preventing brain degradation. So it will help not just physically but also intellectually. And lastly, it's probably one of the best approach to training or type of training for improving insulin sensitivity, which is also something that tends to go down as you're getting older. Okay, and which is the root of many health issues. Okay, so that's also need to be part of the equation. Mobility is a big part of it. I mean, if you are getting older, you've probably noticed that the range of motion is not where it used to be. Maybe because of overuse, maybe because of disuse, maybe because of injuries or whatever. But it's certainly something that decreases significantly with aging. So you need to at least try to maintain it, if not improve it. And finally, on the conditioning side of things, we tend to do more of the slow, steady state cardio, which is what actually your foundation of conditioning work should be, but we tend to neglect the harder conditioning, what I call anaerobic capacity. So the amount of work you can perform in the anaerobic energy systems. So how much very hard work you can perform in like a 3 minute period. Okay, that would also be something that is dramatically decreasing. A proper program should really address all of these aspects to some regard. Now, it's kind of hard to do because that's many things. And I've always said myself, okay, building muscle is hard and takes time. Building strength is hard and takes time. Getting leaner is hard and takes time. Building endurance is hard and takes time, and so on and so forth. So give yourself a chance and focus only on a few of these, and then paradise. That's certainly an approach that you can be using. But now we were talking about pro longevity rather than maximizing your potential. Okay, so concurrent training, trying to improve all of those in our situation or in the pro longevity situation is perfectly fine. We accept that we might not reach the summum level in each capacity, for the possibility to increase everything slightly at the same time, which is probably more beneficial for pro longevity. The way I like to do it is you have, let's say, 2 or 3 hypertrophy based sessions per week. Okay. And then you're going to have 1 or 2 athletic days. One athletic day will be geared more toward power and anaerobic capacity. The other one will be more conditioning related, but still including some skill movement and some explosive exercises. That's a great way to do it. And it makes it very simple. And you can always add low intensity steady state cardio on pretty much all the days because it does not impact, within reason, the results and performance for the other workout. All right. So, with that being said, let's get to your questions. Already, it's funny because as soon as I walked in, I wasn't even set up, and we had like 5 questions already. So never hesitate to post more questions. As I mentioned, the more questions we have, the more fun we're gonna have. So first question from Maria. I don't know, my 14-year-old daughter is playing her first ice hockey season. She wants to start lifting too. She has practiced Monday and Friday. and games on the weekend. So I plan on taking her to the gym Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. What kind of a program should I start her off on, being it during the season? Okay, let's first address. Okay, our goal is to have more power in the skating. Right. Let's first address the just general aspect of your question. I will not consider, for the first part of my answer, that she is in season. Because that will certainly require some changes, but I want to start with the basics. Okay, so training for athletes, training for hockey, and training for a young teenager. Okay, first of all, let's look at training for athletes. My view when it comes to strength training. Okay, you need to understand that when it comes to training, we have several components. We have the strength training portion, which can or can't include hypertrophy. Okay, it can actually be mixed in the same thing. So let's say strength and hypertrophy would be one part of strength conditioning. Power training would be another part, uh, which could be actually blended with speed and agility. So it could be power, speed, agility would be another side. And then you would have the conditioning aspect, which would be training the energy systems that might help her perform better in her sport. Okay. So if we're talking first about the strength portion, which would be the lifting portion, it is my belief that for athletes, this portion does not need to be sport specific. Okay, it's the because the reason is that the main objective of the strength portion for an athlete, there are two objectives. First, will always be injury prevention. Like building muscle, building strength is building an armor, so it actually protects you against impact and reduces the risk of injury, provided that mobility is maintained. Second, and probably more important in understanding how to plan training, is that the main goal of the strength portion of training is to increase the neurological capacity to fire those muscles. Okay. Basically, the stronger the neural drive is, which is the amount of signal or the strength of the activation signal sent to the muscle, the stronger it is, the easier it is to recruit the fast twitch fibers and make them fire fast. Okay. So increasing the strength of that drive will make you more powerful right from the start. If that's something you don't have yet, okay, which would probably be the case with younger athletes who are new to strength training. I would say that with younger athletes, I think it's probably the one situation where strength work actually has a direct increase in speed and power. Okay, once you do have some amount of neurological efficiency or stronger signal already, strength work gives you less and less and less direct results when it comes to uh, building speed and agility and power. Okay, but when you're starting out, it's enough to do just the basic lifts. So certainly you want to hit big all the main muscle regions. Also because the more you train a certain muscle, the more responsive it becomes to the activation signal. Basically, and I don't want to be too complex, uh, it comes down to synaptic facilitation. Synaptic is where, or the synapses is where the drive connects to the muscle, and that information fires that muscle. Okay, that signal fires the muscle. So the more sensitive that junction is, the more strongly you respond to the drive. That has the benefit of making you more powerful, stronger, but also allowing you to reduce the amount of signal you need to get a strong contraction, reducing fatigue and stuff like that. Okay, so you should need to train all the muscles. Okay, and I would do that for the strength portion with mostly basic multi-joint compound movement. For hypertrophy, I would argue that machines are better for several reasons that I mentioned in previous podcasts. But for building the central signal, I believe that more complex, more demanding exercise, which challenges the nervous system more, are better option. Okay, so that would take care of the strength portion. So the strength portion would be uh, just work that is relatively heavy for that person, on the big basic lifts. Normally, I choose to accomplish that goal with 3 or 4 exercises. You can cover pretty much everything with that. So, for example, it could be a squat variation, a hip hinge variation, a press variation, and a pull variation. You can get a job done here. Now, if you are doing something like an Olympic lift as your hip hinge, it's probably best to do only 3 exercises. But let's just focus on those 4 big lifts. Now, ideally, they would be fitted for the person leverage. So if someone has longer legs and a shorter torso, the front squat is likely going to be a better option than a back squat, probably using a slight heel elevation. If on the other end of the spectrum, if someone has short legs relative to the torso, I would stick with a back squat. Uh, if someone has, and I would still probably pick the Romanian deadlift for any body type. Anyway, so you're going to pick exercises that the person is good at doing, also, obviously. And I would not include variation at this point. The goal is just to give the signal to the nervous system. I prefer to stick with the same movement and just vary the sets and reps. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So that's the strength portion. You will also probably want to include some hypertrophy work considering your age. So that would be more on machine exercises, more isolated targeted work, probably on the muscles that are either undertrained or where she needs the most help. Okay, first before with this. So basically, the message with the strength and hypertrophy section, don't think in terms of improving the sport. Think in terms of improving the person. So fixing muscle imbalances. So for hypertrophy, focusing on the weaker muscles or the lagging muscles groups, and for strength, just focus on the big basic to increase the nervous system. Where the training needs to become more specific is with the power and conditioning section. So the power exercise could include stuff like jumps, like throws, like sprints, like crawler sprints, like sled sprints, like variation of the Olympic lift. If you have the competency to teach her, these would all be good choices, and they would fit the sport. So, for example, in hockey, you don't need the same type of jump training as someone who's doing sprints, because in hockey you don't have to absorb as much weight when you put and then push down. It's more of a gliding action. So you have a lot longer contact time with the surface. So you don't need plyometric by itself. It's more a matter of jumps where your foot stays in contact longer, like side to side jumps with one leg, side to side jump with one leg, like pushing to the side, but forward, diagonally, and backwards, for example. The best power training I found for hockey players are sprints with either a sled or a crawler, working up to around 50% of the athlete's weight. I would start with something like 20% and just work our way up as long as speed can be somewhat maintained. I would shoot for something like 20 meters, at the most 30 meters, but like 10 to 20 meters. My friend Ben Prentice, who works with lots of NHLers, has found that the best correlation between speed on the ice and performance in the gym is with the 10-meter sled sprint with 50% body weight. That's of all. It's more a better indication of speed on the ice than jumping and then sprinting. Okay, so I would certainly include that. I prefer with hockey players the sled because it favors a position that is more similar to skating. I would do sled sprints for sure. Okay, for 10 to 20 meters, sometimes up to 30, with 20 up to 50% body weight. Okay, if is competent at learning the Olympic lifts, and if you can teach her, the power clean from the hang, power snatch from the hang could be good choices. Okay? So, and you would include, of course, side to side jumps. The way I like to work when you have limited time to train, which is your case, I would probably do the side to side jumps. So it would be like this. Just do a search on YouTube for skaters jumps. So skaters jumps can be done laterally and can also be done diagonally. So I would actually do that as part of our warm up. Now, important to understand that warm up doesn't mean not focusing on proper execution. To reap the most out of this exercise, you need to treat each jump like a maximum effort. So you would do like 10 reps of side to side jumps, then 10 reps of diagonal jumps, and do like 2 or 3 sets of each. That would actually be a pretty good warm up and activation for your workout. Then you would do, since you're training 3 days a week and it's in season, I wouldn't want to have training sessions that are excessively stressful on the body. Okay. So I would probably, since you have like, I would have two main lifting sessions. The third session could be hypertrophy workout. Okay. So let's say we have two main sessions. So you have four lifts, basic lifts. It could be a squat, a hinge, a press, and a pull. Okay. So you could do one day you do the hinge and the squat. The next day you do push and pull. Okay. So you have two strength lifts per workout. So you do the warm up, which would include side to side jumps, which would include lateral, diagonal skaters jumps. Then you would do the two basic strength lifts. Then you would do the power work. Power work would be the sled sprint in that case. I would do sled sprints all 3 days. Okay, because it's a sled, there's no eccentric. It's fairly easy to recover from, especially at that distance. At first, I would focus more. For example, you have 3 days. I would focus. Let's say one day would be 30 meters with 10% body weight, roughly. Then it would be 20 meters with let's say 20%, and then the next day would be 10 meters with 30%, and you play with the weight. The weight is not that relevant because speed is still the main thing that is important. Okay, so I would do that on all the days because it's going to be the best exercise for her. I mean, if she were to do one exercise only for everything she does, considering her situation and cost to benefit ratio, sled sprints would be what I would recommend. Okay, so you would do that on all 3 days. And then you could do some form of stretching, conditioning, and stuff like that. I don't want to have excessively long workouts in season. Off season is a different story, but in season, especially since she already has 2 practices and probably 2 games, we don't want to overload her recovery capacity, especially since she is new to training. So I would actually prefer that she does what I just mentioned: so 10 minutes of warming up with those jumps. Then it's going to be like probably 15 minutes for the both lifts, so like 7, 8 minutes per lift. Probably doing something like, I'm gonna talk about progression in a moment, and then the sled sprint for let's say 10, 15 minutes. So that would go up to like a 35, 45 minutes workout. That's more than enough. Okay, at this point, focusing quality rather than quantity. As far as for the strength exercises, um, you need to go fairly heavy, but since she's new to training, not so heavy that she breaks form. So I like sets of 5 reps, maybe six, not because I want to be in the heavy zone right away, but because I find that doing too high of a rep with beginners or people with no lifting experience, the technique degrades in the later part of the set. Okay, and so I would probably stick with 5 to 6 reps, leaving a few reps in the tank, making sure that every rep is performed properly, and just gradually increasing weight in that zone. So, for example, you're going to be doing sets, 4 work sets with the same weight, let's say for 5 reps. And when those 4 sets are easy with the same weight, you add weight for the next workout. In season, you never want to reach a point where you are grinding your strength lift. Okay, rather than trying to add more weight and grind, just focus on doing the concentric faster. Okay, but since she's new to training, she will get benefit just from doing the lifts. Okay, and I would really put more effort emphasis on the strength lift. That would be my recommendation. Off season would be different because she has more recovery time, and it's not as bad if she's not recovered for games. For example, if she's playing on a weekend and she's training, I'm going to see your question again. She's training on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Obviously, the Thursday workout would be the easier workout. I would put the hypertrophy work there, so she's fully recovered for the season. For hypertrophy work, I would just do like 4 to 6 exercises, mostly machine and pulley exercises, focusing on the key muscles, and doing let's say 2 or 3 work sets of 6 to 10 reps, depending, with certain proximity to failure. Hopefully that helps. It's kind of a hard question to answer because that's actually a whole seminar on periodization. But hopefully you got some good tips. Our percentage-based program pretty much worthless for someone who has no interest in peaking or competing? Well, worthless? No, nothing is ever worth. Okay, you need to understand what are the pros and what are the cons. I'm not normally a huge fan of percent-based training. Those who know what percent-based training is, or doesn't know, it's typically seen as a powerlifting cycle where you are testing your 1 RM at the beginning, and then you are planning all the weights for your training cycle based on that weight, on that maximum. For example, week one could be, making this up, 3 sets of 5 reps with 80% of your maximum. Then the next week could be 4 sets of 5 reps with 80%, then 5 sets of 5 reps with 80%. Do 3 sets of 3 reps with 85, and so on and so forth. Right? There are many, 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 many different models. Okay, 5-3-1 is another model. But the point is that you are basing your training weight for the whole training cycle on the tested max. The limitation of that is that, well, your strength will fluctuate daily. On some days, because of, let's say, poor recovery, because of fatigue, because of maybe you didn't eat enough, maybe you're stressed out on that day, maybe you didn't train at the same time, maybe you're dehydrated, you can be 10%, 15% weaker. So if you're 10, 15% weaker and you're supposed to do 5 sets of 5 with 85% of your max, and that 85% actually feels like 95%, there's no way you're going to be able to do that. And you're going to like run yourself down trying to do it. Okay. And probably use bad form. On the other end of the spectrum, sometimes you might have, for some reason, a lot of strength that day, and 85 actually feels like 75. And you're kind of wasting the opportunity to give a stronger stimulus when your body is receptive to it. So that would be my limitation, the cons of that system. What I like about the system is that the rigidity is actually something that gives you structure and make sure you don't go off plan. I think that a lot of people switch training or tweak with their training because they think it's not working, but it is. Okay, the fact is that strength and size are not gained super quickly. And our expectations oftentimes exceed the possible reality. So we think it's possible to build 10 pounds of muscle in a month and a half of training. It's not, okay? Even on steroids, that's going to be a hard sell. So if you only gain 3 pounds in the first month, which is amazing, that would be like almost 40 pounds in a year. You think, well, the program is not working. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to play with my volume. I'm going to try this exercise. And that's where shit happens. Okay. So the good thing with those highly structured and rigid programs is that if you stick with it, you will at the end probably end up at the right spot. Yes, you're going to have bad days. Yes, you're going to have good days. But typically speaking, most good programs like that are built conservatively, so it actually lead to the results that the program promises. And from week to week, the fact that you are eating actually increases motivation, and more importantly, it kind of prevents you from going off plan, off program. And most people who make irrational emotional decisions regarding their training, that's where bad things happen, and that kind of helps you with that. Now, if your goal is strength, even if you're not competing, I would argue that those programs can actually be very beneficial because for strength, they work. They actually work. It's not the program itself that's anything magical. It's the structure and discipline it gives you by following it. It makes sure that you're not doing anything stupid that will screw up your results. Okay. There's nothing magical there, but it ensures that you're doing something sane in a progressive manner that will yield to results. The main problem is that most people don't know how to progress, how much weight to add, when to add it, how much volume to add, when to add it. So that these programs kind of take care of that, so that you are doing maybe not something that is the best for you, but certainly something that will work for pretty much everyone. Okay, so if your goal is just getting stronger, even if you're not competing, I would argue that it's a decent approach because it takes the emotions out of the equation, which is our biggest enemy, I would think. If your goal is mostly hypertrophy or muscle building, no, I wouldn't go with that type of program. All right. Can you use strength methods for hypertrophy as long as you hit a good number of maximum effective reps? For example, high rep clusters, lift from pins, dynamic reps at the weak points, etc. Yes, I'm actually just finished an article on that exact topic. for T Nation. Basically, I'm writing an article series on the various broad categories of training. The first one being effort based, which was published earlier this week. Effort based training, which would be high intensity, low volume training. Then next week, probably, it's already been submitted. It's going to be the volume based approach, which uses a higher volume of work and uses volume as the main progression tool. And the third part will be about load based hypertrophy training, how to use heavier lifting to promote muscle growth, also called power building. Okay. And I do mention some of the methods you are yourself mentioning, like the clusters, which would be very effective, like partials, I also mentioned, eccentric overloads, and isometrics, functional isometrics. Now, uh, some points. Yes, with heavy lifting, you absolutely can stimulate muscle growth if you get enough effective reps. Okay, and that is typically not an issue if you go for, I would say, the strength building zone. There's a difference between strength building and strength demonstration zone. So one, two, maybe up to 3 reps per set with weights in the like vicinity of 92 to 100% of your 1RM. This is more to develop your capacity to showcase the strength that you already have built. Okay, because it doesn't easily build muscle. Okay, it's great for neurological development, which allows you to use what you already have maximally. Okay, but because of the low volume of work that is possible with that type of training, it's kind of hard to build enough muscle to get strength building. Strength building is a combination of neurological and muscular factors. Okay, uh, really, yeah, you can always you can argue, well, but let's say I need, let's say, 20 effective reps. I'm just making this up. Uh, so wouldn't doing like 8 sets of 3 reps, which would give me 24, be enough for size? Yes, it would. Absolutely. But just for fun, try to do 8 sets of 3 reps with 92%. Okay. It's doable, but it's not sustainable. Okay, I've done that when I was younger because I was made of titanium, but I could not do that today and recover properly. I would probably have joint issues. So if you're naturally built for strength, so big tendons, big joints, you probably can do that amount of volume with that amount of weight, but it's going to be really hard on your joints, really on your tendons, and also very hard neurologically. So it probably is not sustainable over the long run. Maybe for 4 to 6 weeks blocks, that's doable, but not something you can do for a long period of time. Okay, I've tried with the Shako program, which oftentimes had 8 sets of 3 reps, but with a light weight, like 75 to 80%, and I just couldn't do it. So that's where the it tends to break. Same thing if you look at the maximum effort used by Westside Barbell, they typically recommend 3 maximum effective reps, 3 maximum effort reps. So that would be 3 attempts with very heavy weights. So again, it's very hard to get up to 10, 20, 30 effective reps if you're using a load that is in the 95, 97, 100, 102% range. It's just not tolerable, and the risk of injury is way too high. It's just not practical. Okay, but if we're talking about the strength building zone, which would be the 4 to 6 reps, 4 to 6 reps with a weight in the vicinity of 85, let's say 83, 88%, that's the probably the best zone to build strength because that zone is heavy enough to have a neurological improvement, significant neurological improvement, almost maximal, but it also is in a volume to get the growth and it is sustainable as opposed to doing a high amount of sets with very, very, very heavy weights. Okay, so that is certainly something that is doable. Again, we would use a mode of progression, of course. Clusters very effective for that purpose. That's why clusters, I've always mentioned that the best method to build strength, not to demonstrate strength. The best method to demonstrate strength is probably the 3-2-1 wave, but to build strength clusters, because even a regular cluster, like you have several, I have a few articles on clusters on T Nation. You can just go look at them. I describe all the various clusters. But if you just look at the Miller accumulation cluster or the traditional Polycon clusters, they typically have 4 to 6 reps with a load that is around what you can lift for 3 reps. So you end up doing more reps with a load that is like 92%. So obviously, because it's 92%, those reps will recruit the fast twitch fibers and will be fairly slow. The two conditions necessary to get maximum growth: tension and fast twitch fibers. So all the reps in the clusters are effective reps. So and now you can do 6 in a set rather than 3 in a set. So it's the same hypertrophy stimulation as a normal hypertrophy set, plus the benefit of the neurological improvement. So certainly that's something that is useful. The two best methods when it comes to building muscle through heavy loading would be clusters and heavy rest pause. So rest pause with an initial load that you could get like 3 to 5 reps with, and then doing double that number of reps. So it could be something like 4 reps, rest, let's say 3 reps, rest, 1 rep, something like that, or some more combination like that. That would, or just a double rest pause with a heavy weight would work fine. If you do, for example, 4, 2, 1 as a double rest pause, that gives you 4, 6, 7 effective reps in a set, which is actually more than a typical hypertrophy set. It works perfectly fine. And because it's going to use a load that is probably something like 88, 90%, it's going to have maximal neurological improvement. And there's also other benefits when it comes to lifting heavy, like improving in muscle density, muscle tone, stuff. The other methods you mentioned would have some form of a caveat. For example, lift from pins. What range of motion are you training? Okay, lift from pins, because of the shortened range of motion, there's less mechanical work being performed under high tension state. So that can actually not be great or as good for hypertrophy as a typical full range of motion rep. But again, it depends on how much are you shortening the range of motion. If I'm doing bench press from pins, 1 hinge from the chest, it's basically a full range movement. That's going to be as effective, probably more because of the higher tension at the start of the movement, because you're starting from a dead start than regular bench. But if you're doing top half bench press, uh, then the amount of mechanical work is much lower than a closed grip bench press, for example. So to make it a great exercise for hypertrophy, I would probably double the reps I would normally do. So, for example, if you typically train for strength, let's say you would do, let's say like 3 reps, 3 reps on the full range, then you're going to do 6 reps on partial. 5 to 6 reps. It doesn't have to be double, but it's more. Okay. Obviously, if you're doing half the range of motion, double the reps. If you're doing 2/3 of range of motion, you can probably increase only by 20, 25%. Okay. The point is that you need to probably increase the number of reps per set when doing partial reps when you're shooting for hypertrophy. You're still going to use a super maximum weight, so the neurological impact is still very strong. The impact on the Golgi tendon organ is still very strong, but you're going to have now enough mechanical work to compensate for the lack of range of motion. Um, Now, if you look at statodynamic reps, yes, I really love that. Because statodynamic reps, you keep the full range of motion. You're just doing a pause at a weaker point. So you're strengthening that point a bit more. I would do the pause during the eccentric most of the time because you're stronger there. If you do the pause during the concentric, you're going to have to decrease the load too much, making the eccentric completely ineffective. So do the pause, either 1, 2, or 3 pauses during the eccentric. That's something that I often use with athletes. When I train athletes, I don't typically focus on hypertrophy by itself. I use methods like statodynamic, like accentuated eccentrics, slow eccentrics, and heavy lifting, and they all report increasing muscle mass. Okay, so it's certainly something that is quite possible. The one caveat I would have, or the one issue I might raise, is that when you're basically doing mostly the big basic lifts, you will always have a bias, a development bias toward your stronger muscles. Because when you are doing a lift, that's a bench press or a squat, your body doesn't know that you want a big chest to impress people. It just knows that there's a big weight trying to kill you, and if you don't lift it, you're going to die underneath. Okay, so in the interest of survival, it will always use the muscle best suited to do the job. Now, if I'm using a sub maximum weight, a weight that is fairly easy, I can actually voluntarily change the muscle recruitment by focusing more, like putting some tweaks and position changes to put more emphasis on the chest, for example. Okay, but the heavier the load gets, or the faster I'm trying to move, the more my nervous system will go back to its normal setting, its optimal settings. And thus, when you do heavy lifting, you will tend to over focus on your dominant muscles. So you probably need to include more targeted hypertrophy work for your lagging muscle groups if you want complete development. Hopefully that's helpful. All right. I did body weight, 3 seconds eccentric Nordic curls, plyo push up, jumping dumbbell squats, and pull ups. Why do I feel sore the next day? Okay, well, first, where are you sore? If you're doing the Nordic hamstring curls with the slow eccentrics, I would, especially if they are full range. By the way, if you're capable of doing them on full range, my hats off to you. That's a pretty good accomplishment. Uh, that will absolutely cause lots of muscle damage. Okay, anytime you emphasize the eccentric, you are causing muscle damage. Now, the plyometric and jump exercises, that's a more complex story. Okay, because you have less mechanical work being performed, or more precisely, you have less tension being produced. Because when you do an explosive movement, you have less, you have more speed. More speed means less tension because of the acceleration, because of the momentum. Okay, so but if you absorb the body when you land, you are creating a shock that can be a very, very powerful eccentric action. You're using eccentric strength to absorb the load of your body and dumbbells falling down. To stop it, you need to have a very, very, very strong eccentric action. Okay, now that can actually lead to soreness, muscle damage, simply because of the very high tension in eccentric loading. So that tension or soreness in that type of workout does not surprise me, especially if it's something that is new to you. Because if it's new to you, if you haven't done these in a while, your structural adaptations to that type of exercise or contraction are probably not there anymore. So your body is not suited to absorb that, and it causes more damage. I want to mention that what causes the soreness and is the muscle damage. The muscle damage is not caused by tearing those muscle fibers apart. That's not what causes it. So you don't have to like stretch the like do the eccentric. What causes the damage is the leakage of calcium ions during a contraction. The more calcium ions are leaked out, the more damage it causes to the muscle fibers. And so normally, the more amount of time spent under load or under high level of tension, the more calcium ions will leak. But certainly, if you're doing something that your body is not efficient at doing, I could actually see more leakage causing more damage. So yeah, I'm not over surprised by the fact that you're sore. I'm going to give myself as an example. I remember I was doing years ago, and I always use that example for something not to do, like a workout that sounds great on paper, and you think you're going to get great result, but it completely screws up your progression. A few years ago, I was getting back into the Olympic lifts. I was training CrossFit athletes at the time, so I was doing the Olympic lifts to impress them, and I want to like get strong again. So the one thing I lacked was leg strength and power because I had been training for a bro for a while. So I decided to do a workout. It was a complex. So complex is like 2 or 3 exercises done back to back. It was a rest period, but it's like I did squats, then I did jump squats with 60 kilos, then I did depth jumps, 10 depth jumps. So it was 5 heavy squats with a slow eccentric. Then it was uh, 5 jump squats with 60 kilos, and then 10 depth jumps from I think a 75 centimeters box, and then jumping up as high as I can. And I did 10 sets of that. Okay. And afterwards, I felt great. Dude, that's great workout. I'm going to regain my leg strength and power in no time. I'm going to be snatching 130, etc. Okay. So, what actually happened is that the next day, I was so sore on my vastus lateralis, I couldn't squat down lower than a quarter squat. That pain actually stayed with me for 21 days. It took me 21 days to be able to full squat with a decent weight again. So talk about counterproductive. But just to explain that the amount of squatting was not that much, and I was squatting still at the time. It's the amount of explosive work, absorption shock work that actually caused tremendous amount of soreness. So I'm not surprised that you felt that. That's why when you start explosive work, especially if it includes absorption, lots of force absorption, you need to gradually work yourself into that. I'm 50 years young. Sorry, I was just diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic. I'm sorry about that. Will TRT benefit? I'm really not comfortable answering that question. I don't like injury questions, even less health-related questions, especially in such a serious condition. So I'm really sorry. I really can't offer any valuable advice. I'm really sorry. Hi, Chris. I'm interested in your martial arts or VO2 training. I'd like to use bag work for it. Well, first, the martial arts I'm doing is not VO2 work, VO2 max work. It's actual martial arts training. It's not designed to train any specific energy system. For example, when we do karate, um, we're practicing techniques. So it's not that demanding. Now, if we do grappling work, yeah, it gets more energy demanding, but it's not structured in that way. It's just we're learning various forms of combat, and sometimes it's training, sometimes it's not. The reason why I decided to add more energy systems work is even with technique work, because we had to fit in a lot of reps. Lots of reps. I was actually out of breath from doing technique work. And when you're out of breath and your brain lacks oxygen, technical efficiency is just not great. So I knew that I needed to improve that. Now, I I don't really like doing traditional cardio because it feels like super what's it, boring to me, and it just gives my motivation. But I like hitting things. So doing bag work is certainly something that I can do for rounds of, let's say, 2 minutes. And in 2 minutes, I can throw a lot of punches. So that actually gets me winded, and that trains the anaerobic capacity system. But that's not really VO2 max training. VO2 max would require something more traditional, like intervals. Like for example, this morning I did um, kind of a Jim Wendler inspired workout. I did assault bike for half a mile. Then I did dips, and then weight vest squats. And then I went back to the assault bike, and I did that 4 times. Okay, without rest. So that would be more VO2 max effective, if you want to call it that. But yeah, me, I like to include forms of sport activity as conditioning. They have to be lower skill exercises, otherwise you just have poor technique. But yeah, it's something that I personally prefer over the more traditional forms. And if I'm going to use the traditional forms, I'm going to throw in some fun stuff in that, like I did this morning. About L-citrulline instead of L-citrulline malate, did I make the wrong decision? It's likely not going to make a huge impact. Okay, it's kind of like magnesium. Okay, um, magnesium, for example, you have. I lost my question. Sorry. Okay, like the magnesium, you have magnesium taurate, you have magnesium glycinate, you have magnesium biglycinate, you have magnesium citrate. It's all the same magnesium. It's all the same magnesium. It's just a molecule is added to it, and that molecule itself can have impact. But the magnesium, when it's once it's freed from the bound substance, it's magnesium. It does the same thing. It's, for example, if I'm taking magnesium glycinate, well, once it's separated into magnesium and glycine, magnesium does its thing, and it's all the same, and glycine does its thing, neurological inhibitor, for example. So acrylamide malate might be in the same thing. Acrylamide malate, sorry. Do green powders actually work for combating free radicals and inflammation? I've read turmeric and fish oil is more than enough. Uh, Strictly from an inflammation or anti-inflammatory standpoint, I agree 100%. Although turmeric by itself has very, very poor uh, bioavailability. So it's very, very hard to get enough of that to actually have an effect. Even curcumin by itself is very poorly absorbed. It's best if it's added with piperine, which will increase absorption, or again, just preaching to my for my own product, biotest as a curcumin formula that is absorbed like 10 times better because of the delivery system. So the curcumin will do its job. It's a great anti-inflammatory product, and it also has other benefits like stomach health and stuff like that, and even weight loss. But to be effective, it needs to be properly absorbed. So the delivery system is as important as the product itself. Fish oil, uh, again, same thing. We would need to have a higher ratio of, I think, EPAs. That is the more anti-inflammatory one. Again, I want to preach for my own company. Flame Out by Biotest has the highest ratio of those effective amino fatty acids for anti-inflammation. Okay, so I would certainly go with those two products. Personally, I stick with that. I'm not someone who uses green supplements. Now, I did in the past at one point because I'm not someone who takes in a lot of veggies. I'm not using when I'm using greens. It's not for their anti-inflammatory or anti-free radical. Uh, it's more for the phytonutrients that I'm lacking from not eating vegetables. But strictly for what you're trying to accomplish, a quality curcumin, like Biotest curcumin, and a quality fish oil like Flame Out is gonna do the job. If you would design a training program for a 45-year-old male with no prior training experience who wants to build the maximum amount of muscle naturally, how would you do it? You're actually asking me to design a training program in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, without knowing the person and actually doing what I do for a living and get money for. Okay, so I can't design a program on the spot like that. Just to give you an idea, when I'm building a program, like for example, I designed um, three new programs for Testosterone Nation. You can actually get them on the store. So you go on tnation.com, click on the store, online store, and you go in the plan category. My programs are there. Uh, each of these programs, which are only 6 weeks long, it took me a day and a half for each program. A day and a half. Let's say it's 6 hours. 6 hours of actual work to create those programs, because it's not just about okay, I'm going to pile up some exercise, some sets and reps, and stuff. I really have to think about interaction of sets and reps, progression model, the best combination of exercise to be most efficient. It takes me some time to build programs. The same thing with my coaching groups. I have 2 days in my week where I do program design. I can't do a program in 30 minutes, much less in 5 minutes and be a great program. Okay. So I can't give you an answer. Now, what I can tell you, especially since that for a 45-year-old, uh, with no prior training experience, first of all, you need to lift. You need to learn to lift. So it's going to be mostly a matter of just the first 8 weeks is actually not going to be focused on maximizing hypertrophy. It's just going to be maximized on focus on maximizing technical learning, not just learning movement, but also learning to contract the proper muscles. Because if you have no prior lifting experience, that's going to be the biggest stumbling block. Even if I give you the best exercise for chest, for example, you do the exercise, and if you don't have any experience squeezing or contracting, getting that muscle firing, then you're probably not going to get much from that exercise. So it's really about spending time at first, learning to contract each muscle against resistance, and learning technical efficiency. Then you can talk. Then we can start talking about programming. Coach, opinion on doing 45 to 90 minutes of zone 2 cardio as a secondary workout of the day. What are the pros and cons? Yeah, I see no problem with that. Zone 2 might be, I don't want to say high. It's not something that you could do every single day. Okay. And certainly not after on the same day as the more grueling workout. I would do more zone one cardio most of the time. Like my background cardio is zone one. Zone two would actually be an actual additional workout, just like when I do hard conditioning. And typically, I would put the harder cardio or the longer cardio on days where I'm not lifting. Okay, that would be the ideal situation. Now, if you do it afterwards, later in the day, that's better than doing it right afterwards. Uh, Zone two, it's honestly, it's kind of a hard thing to answer because uh, it's probably not going to have a huge impact on your recovery from the session. Okay, but it might negatively impact the next day's workout just because of the overall workload of that two a day, 2 sessions. workout. For example, yesterday I did kind of like what you just mentioned. I did um, my workout, and 3 hours later, I did a harder conditioning session, uh, zone two ish, zone two and three ish. And today, honestly, I would not have been able to lift hard. Okay, so that's why I did more of a conditioning session today because I just didn't have much gas today. So that's something you need to consider. It's probably not going to impact the gains you're going to get or have stimulated from the first session in the day, but it could, combined with the first session, reduce your capacity to train hard the next day. So when you're planning those 2 a days, you probably need to do those when you're not training the next day or you're doing something easier the next day. What happens to muscle? Oh, sorry, skip a question. How much will training at around 50% intensity slows down the atrophy process, currently nursing an injury? When you say 50% intensity, do you refer to using weights that are 50% of your maximum, or do you refer to doing sets with a lot of reps in reserve? Okay, because a 50% effort could be, for example, if I can do 20 reps with a weight, I'm doing 10 reps with that weight. That would be a 50% effort. But intensity could also mean I'm using 50% of my 1 RM, but I'm still pushing that set hard. And the answer will be completely different uh, based on which one you're talking about. If you're talking about, I'm going to use light weights, but do reps close to failure or to failure with that load, then it's going to be absolutely effective at preventing atrophy. It actually is going to probably stimulate some growth. I mean, if you go close to failure, regardless of the number of reps it takes you to get there, you're going to get the same amount of effective reps as if you're doing a heavier load. So, in that sense, if you do, for example, 8 reps with 1 rep in reserve, so 1 rep before failure, or if you do 20 reps with 1 rep before failure, both set will probably be as effective at stimulating growth. Obviously, the first one will lead to more strength gain because it's heavier. But strictly from a preventing atrophy standpoint, both will be equally effective. The problem becomes if you're talking about the level of effort. So rather than, for example, doing 15 reps with a weight, I'm going to use the same weight and do 8 reps. That's going to be a lot less effective. That is not going to be a stimulus strong enough to prevent atrophy. It's just work that does not stimulate growth. So lighter weights, if they're done with proximity to failure, can absolutely build muscle and certainly prevent atrophy. But submaximum weights done with a submaximum effort are not going to be really helpful in that regard. I mean, it's better than doing nothing, but it's certainly not something that will prevent atrophy. It might slow it down slightly, but that's not a great tool for that purpose. What happens to muscles if trained at maintenance for a long period of time, no calorie surplus or deficit? Density? No, you can build muscle. It's what you need to build muscle is a stimulus. Then you need the anabolic processes that trigger protein synthesis, and you need the nutrients to either fuel the workout or fuel or provide the bricks to build muscle. Okay, in a maintenance state, maintenance refers to the amount of calories you need to maintain your level of fatness, if you're going to call it that. You can absolutely build muscle on a maintenance diet, provided that you are giving your body the proper training stimulus, which you are, and that you're getting the proper anabolic response. Now, that's where food becomes interesting because food, especially protein and carbohydrates, can activate many of those anabolic processes. So in a sense, being a surplus makes it much easier to build muscle. It's not mandatory, it just makes it easier. The reason it makes it easier is that more when you're in a surplus, you're consuming more food. More food, especially if it's from protein and carbohydrates, will increase the anabolic response, will increase insulin, will increase IGF-1, will increase mTOR activation, will decrease cortisol. All of these things puts your body in a more anabolic state, which is more conducive to building new tissue. But you can still activate insulin, IGF-1, mTOR, and reduce cortisol if you're in a maintenance level. Okay, because you're still getting food in, you're still getting protein and carbohydrates in, you're still activating those processes to a smaller extent, but you can still get growth. So it's not a matter of increasing muscle density. Muscle grows or it doesn't. It gets bigger, smaller, or it stays the same. And just because you're at maintenance doesn't mean you can't build muscle. It makes the muscle building process slower because you have less anabolic activation. Okay, but provided that protein is sufficient and you have enough energy to train hard, and if you're progressing in your workouts and you're stimulating growth. The problem is that muscle growth is a very slow process, even in the best possible situation. Okay. If you are not a beginner, okay, if you are intermediate or even advanced, the rate of muscle growth is excruciatingly slow. Building half a pound of muscle per month while being natural is pretty darn good. Okay, it's going to give you 6 pounds of muscle in a year. That doesn't sound like much, but when's the last time you actually gained 6 pounds of muscle, or someone else? Okay, if you're gaining 1 pound of muscle a month, that's 12 pounds of hard muscle. That's not body weight. 12 pounds of muscle, even if you don't gain fat, that's going to be an increase in scale weight of around 18, 20 pounds. Okay, that's not small. When's the last time you're gaining 20 pounds in body weight without getting fatter in a year? That doesn't happen. So objectively speaking, building even 1 pound of muscle a month is very, very fast. And it's something that most intermediate lifters cannot do on a regular basis. Yes, you can build more muscle. Yes, you can yes, you can build more body weight. You can increase glycogen storage, gain some fat, gain more water. So weight fluctuates. But actual muscle tissue, it's a slow process. So if you are in a caloric maintenance level, it makes the process slower. It doesn't stop it, it makes it slower. But it's already super slow. So you can easily have the impression that you're not building muscle simply because you're building at a rate of, let's say, 0.25 pounds per month. That's super slow, but it's still happening. You're still growing. Okay. In a deficit, that's a harder thing to achieve. But at maintenance level, you certainly can build muscle, even though it's so slow. It might actually looks like you're not building muscle. What do you think about training twice a week? I'm kind of victim of my own success here because typically I can't go more than an hour, and it's an hour already, and I have like a zillion more questions that make me feel so happy but so bad at the same time. I'm gonna try to get. I'm okay. You stop posting questions now because I'm already have enough. I don't want to just keep them for next week. I'm gonna try to do a blitz answer. You're not spending too much time. I'm sorry for those who'll get their questions answered now because you're going to get a shorter answer. But I'm trying to answer as many as I can. What do you think about training twice a week with only the big six lift? Deadlift, squat, bench press, chin ups, rows, and overhead press. I've been thinking of doing this. What's your goal? What's your goal? If you want to get stronger, that certainly is a very valid approach. Building muscle, uh, yeah, it's doable. Of course, they train that way for a long time, and it does build muscle. Weight, provided it's done with progressive resistance, so trying to gradually get stronger or gradually increase the number of reps you're doing, it will. And these lifts are perfectly fine. I would argue that the deadlift it is not a great muscle builder. It's a great strength movement or strength tester. But certainly, I think that you will be able to build muscle and strength with that approach without any issues. I see no problem with that. Of course, then it will be a matter of the progression model you're using. Also understand that these movements are somewhat draining, so you can't do tons of volume with each. So really focus on just if size is your goal, just try to focus on getting gradually stronger in a 5 to 8 reps range. And if it's strength, I would just focus on getting stronger in the 3 to 5 rep range. Or you can actually alternate both. But yeah, you can get pretty good results with that. When do you do? When do you have ascending resistance curve and their purpose? If I back squat and want to do a pendulum as well, should I use bands on the pendulum to have an ascending resistance profile? Uh, to me, It's a matter. I use it for two reasons. The first reason would be for an athlete who requires more end range strength. So, for example, if I'm doing training for sprinting or anything that requires jumping and sprinting, then you need to be stronger in the 90 degrees and joint angle and up. So the bottom portion is actually not very useful in sports. Now, when I'm training athletes, we do, for example, full squats for most of the preparation period. But what I call the transfer phase, or what some people call the sport specific phase, I would actually use methods that emphasize the sport specific range of motion, the range of motion that is the most useful for your sport, and also overload that range more. So if I'm an athlete, that would mean either doing partial squats or keeping the full squat, but using something like bands or chains to overload the top half of the range of motion. In that case, it's mostly to be sport specific to really overload that range of motion. The second reason would be if the person has a certain uh, muscle weakness that I want to address. So, for example, if they have weak triceps, I might use ascending resistance on pressing movement just to put more load on the triceps because they are doing most of the work at the end of range of motion. Same thing with squats. If the main issue is quad development, they have a very strong glutes, very strong adductors, but poor quads, which often happens with people with long limbs, then you can use ascending resistance on a hack squat and on a pendulum squat to focus more on quadriceps. That would be the second reason. Why does the military press and the dip transfer to the bench press, but horizontal pressing with the bench doesn't transfer to dips and military press as well? Uh, for the dips, it's kind of a harder question to answer. Maybe I would assume it's because of the control of the body. Just like, for example, chin lat pull downs don't really transfer well to chin up performance because the chin up is not just about strength; it's also about controlling your body and creating the proper tension, not to create dead weight. Okay, so the dips can be the same thing. It's a more precise movement, if you want to call it that. For the overhead press, it's a stability issue. Lots of people who bench press a lot. Okay, that's not the same stabilization as stabilizing the weight overhead, which is a lot harder to do. Okay. Furthermore, if you do lots of bench pressing, you can become overtight, which makes it very hard to reach a proper overhead position, and you have to overextend the thoracic spine to compensate. That gives you really, really poor leverage, so you can't lift heavy weights like that. So that would be the main reason why the bench press doesn't transfer well to the overhead press. For example, my friend Jean-François Caron, who was one of the strongest men competing in World's Strongest Man. I think he finished third a few times. He pretty much never trained the benches anymore because that actually hurts his overhead press. Uh, Coach, I have a dynamometer to test grip strength, CNS overload. What's the pound percentage difference to be determined if I need to rest or go lighter? Uh, I would probably go with if it's down by something like 10%. I would take it easier, especially on the load, the amount of weight you're using. So maybe do a bit more volume, but less intensity. And if it's down by 20-25%, I would skip the day. I'm able to dumbbell bench press 105 dumbbells per hand for 5 by 5, but left hand grip is not as tight. Should I stay at 105 until my left hand grip is adapted to carrying the dumbbells with one hand? And that would be my recommendation. That would be my recommendation. But I would probably not wait until it happens. I would probably do grip work for the left hand just to speed up the process. Grip strength is something that is very, very neurological. So it can actually be improved very fast. So if just, I remember I was getting back to the Olympic lift years ago, and I've been trained by, I was training more for bodybuilding and using straps for everything. So my grip strength was shit. And I have small hands, so that doesn't help. I couldn't even even with hook grip, I just couldn't like snatch 50 kilos just because I couldn't grab the bar. Uh, I just did grip strength for 2 weeks and I was able to like work my way back up to 100 kilos with no problem. Grip strength is very, very easy to strengthen. So it doesn't take a lot of work. So if I would do just at the end of your sessions, let's say 2 3 times a week, I would do some form of either pinch grip work or just using the grippers or just holding weights with your fingers. Just there are tons of great grip exercise to be found on the internet. If you go on tnation.com, I think I have something called the pinch grip deadlift that is very good for grip strength. In 2 or 3 weeks, that should actually fix the issue. How many sets are considered in a low volume, high effort program? Anywhere between, I want to say, 4 and 8 sets per muscle work sets. Coach, actually, I go on best, even better answer. Go to tnation.com. I have an article published this week called Effort Based Training. It actually gives you all the parameters: sets, reps, training methods, training splits, all that stuff. So you can very easily answer all your questions you have about low volume, high effort training, which I call effort based training. Coach, do you recommend heavy squats and heavy leg presses on the same day? Sure. I do legs once a week, training for a combination of strength and size. I see absolutely no issues with that. Again, I personally don't like the leg press because it doesn't work well for my structure. I prefer the hack squat. But if the leg press is something you respond well to, I absolutely see no issue. In fact, when I design a lift specific approach, which would be kind of similar to what you're doing for your legs, because we have a in a lift specific approach, one day is devoted to the squat, so we do the squat or squat variation, and the second exercise is a heavy assistance exercise. So it can be another squat variation, it can be a leg press, it could be a hack squat done fairly heavy. Probably not as heavy as the first one, but still fairly heavy. Let's say instead of going in the like 3 to 5 rep range, we might go in the 5 to 6 rep range for something like that. Okay, but yeah, it's something that I use a lot of times. I see absolutely no issues with that. Can one use the grease the groove methodologies with ISO extremes? Uh, what do you mean? Because the grease the groove approach is based on a very very high frequency of non-fatiguing work. So the ISO extremes typically shoot for, well, you could. The way I would do this is calculate what is the longest duration you can hold for a set on the ISO extreme, and then you will do your sets at around 70% of that. Uh, that would be an intensity level that would allow for a high frequency. So what you would do is, let's say you want to do these every day, okay? And that's something that is very similar to what I did with a CrossFit athlete who needed to increase his strict handstand push-ups. So we would test his maximum number of handstand push-up on Sunday. So you can actually test what's the longest you can hold on those positions on Sunday, okay? And then for every single day, we would do sets at 70% effort, as many as we could. So again, as many as we could without creating fatigue. So for example, I would probably just do 1 or 2 sets at a time. We don't want the 70% sets to feel like 100% because of fatigue. So I would probably do that like just one set 2 or 3 times a day. Okay, but at 70%, and you do that as often as you can, and then you retest yourself on Sunday. If it went up, you calculate the new 70%. That's how I would do it. I would actually also do that with positional strength. All right. You recommend a workout? Can you recommend a workout for a skinny guy at home, not on a YouTube video? Can I build muscle without bulking? First, I don't like the word bulking. Okay, because words have power. Okay, to me, bulking means eating all kind of crap just to get in a super large surplus to build as much body weight as possible, and gaining lots of fat in the process. So the question should be more like, can I build muscle without adding fat? Okay. The answer is yes, but it's harder. It's a lot slower. Okay, a lot slower. I kind of answered that question indirectly earlier on, in that food is an anabolic. Especially if you are a skinny guy, you probably are not born with an anabolic advantage. Like some people naturally have higher level of anabolic hormones and respond much more easily to training, build muscle more easily. If you're uh, long and thin, you probably don't have that advantage. So you need to fully take advantage of the anabolic effect of proteins and carbohydrates to maximize the anabolism of your body, but building muscle. So in that sense, food becomes your drug. So if you're trying to build muscle without gaining any fat, that means that you have to restrict how much food you ingest. Okay, and that will make it much harder to build muscle because you're not increasing your anabolic processes as much. The more food you put in, the more anabolic processes go up. So if you want to build muscle without getting too much fat, what I would recommend is increasing the amount of cardio you do, but eating a lot. So basically using the cardio or physical activity to prevent from getting fat or too much fat so that you can eat more. But if you're in your situation, you're more a skinny ectomorph, you probably need food as your anabolic. So it's going to be very, 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 very hard to build a significant amount of muscle uh, without gaining some fat. I'm not telling you to get fat, but you need a surplus. Not a Don't eat crap. Eat quality food. Don't pile on body fat, but you're certainly in a situation will gain muscle much much faster in a slight. All right, guys. I think that's my personal record, like an hour and 15 minutes. Sorry about being too quick for the last questions because I wanted to answer everyone, at least partially. Hopefully, that was still somewhat helpful. So, again, thank you for being here. It's getting better every week. I have more questions every week. So, every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, same time, hopefully, I'm going to see you there. Call your friends and have good questions ready. Take care, guys.